That thing is happening again, you know, where early critic reviews kind of tear a movie apart. But then after that, and conveniently just before the movie comes out, all these one-sentence 10-star reviews are released from people who have never reviewed anything else. Almost as if the people defending this film were suddenly taken by an alien symbiotic force. Now, we can't just stand by, we've got to fight this invading force. Oh, and I heard the symbiotes have a weakness to sound. I've got the perfect thing. Oh yeah, if anything's gonna defeat them, it's this. Well, I just checked the weekend box office numbers, and as much as a symbiote's weakness might be sound and fire, a musical on fire like A Star Is Born couldn't even put a dent in a major comic book movie. Which means, much to the chagrin of celebrities like Ethan Hawke and Jodie Foster, that this subgenre of Hollywood is really not going anywhere. And while some people may have comic book movie fatigue, this phase is not slowing down. And Jodie, you're just gonna have to realize there is an audience for this. Much like you feel there's an audience for movies about Mel Gibson and a beaver puppet. I have a theory about comic book movies that I'd like to share, and Venom is at the very crux of it, because a lot of people believe that this modern phase of comic book films started with the MCU now a decade ago, but many others will remember that it was in fact with X-Men in 2000 that this modern comic book era began. That's right, kids. Fox, who nowadays can't even decide when to release their movies, actually showed studios how profitable this thing could be. This history lesson is important because it's important to note that this modern era of comic book films didn't begin a decade ago, it began 2 decades ago, which means that we now have a generation of young people, teenagers, and 20-somethings who didn't really see those films 20 years ago. They were too young. And it wasn't until I saw Venom that I realized this is all starting over again, because now, with this demographic being younger people, not typically 30-somethings, these younger people weren't around for that first generation where they would have watched a lot of garbage. Whoa, 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 whoa. Before you all go crazy, hear me out. There are all things we can agree on, like how universally terrible Halle Berry's Catwoman was, or how universally celebrated Raimi's first 2 Spider-Mans should be. But as much as I will defend Thomas Jane's Punisher with my last dying breath, and perhaps even Affleck's Daredevil, let's face it, they weren't the best movies. The irony being that my criticism is of course shaped by being a fan of the genre, a nerd, a critic, and a 30-something who has kind of grown past all of this. And I would actually argue that perhaps all of us should be as consumers and audience members, because we've actually at this point been shown what true greatness is within the CBM genre. Sadly, Venom is not an example of greatness. Yes, it's entertaining. Yes, young people will probably love it, and yes, some people will defend it. But when I saw a TV spot claiming that Venom was the most original comic book movie of its era, bull. The fact is, it's akin to all of those subpar comic book movies of the turn of the century. You might personally want to relive some of those experiences, but I'm good. There were so many moments where I was reminded of the effects of Spawn, the awkward humor of Daredevil, the in-your-face nature of Ghost Rider, and the fight scenes of Transformers. It seems like they were purposefully trying to do scenes or homages to the late 90s and early 2000s. Okay, granted, the first Transformers was 2007, but that kind of bad transcends time. Now, maybe Sony tried to do this on purpose. No, really, maybe. Maybe. You see, Venom really came out in the 80s, but became popular in the 90s, when comic books were extreme, where it was all about teeth, blades, big guns, big hair, and an inexplicable attachment to pouches everywhere in a uniform. What was that? But that being an homage might actually be giving Sony... no, it is. It's giving them way too much credit. Because if Sony has proven anything, it's that they only understand Spider-Man as a character when he's in a video game or he's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in partnership with Marvel Entertainment. But Sony thought they had a solution. Let's build a Spidey universe and then take Spider-Man out of it. I know I'm not the only one who thought that Venom and Spider-Man are so intrinsically intertwined. Everything that Venom is about at the beginning of his journey, his anger, his motivation, his powers, it's all because of Spider-Man. This particular version we see of Eddie Brock right at the beginning of the movie actually took years to cultivate. In the comic book, he started as a villain, then he became popular, then he became an anti-hero. But right off the bat, we start with anti-hero Eddie. Now, I will say that Tom Hardy and Sony did get part of Eddie right. That tragic, can't catch a break kind of guy, it's all there. But without the rest of that backstory, it's just not as rich a character. I loved what Hardy did with Eddie, and there were enough Eddie-isms that made this character that's 30 years old come to life. But it was Eddie and Venom together that made this movie worthwhile. The dynamic between Venom and Eddie was definitely the best part. And you know what? Tom Hardy seemed to be the only one really putting any effort into this movie, reportedly playing both halves of the schizophrenic conversation. It was a lot of fun, it was funny, it was an interesting dynamic that we haven't really had in a comic book hero, and it was for the win. The rest of this movie just seems super rushed and really poorly thought out, which actually mirrors the production of this movie. It was announced and then before you know it, it came out. The script was nowhere to be seen, and you know what? The movie reflected that. It was an hour and 20 minutes long, but there's no story, no development, just boom, alien symbiotes who give you the power and comparable appearance to a superhero we can't really mention. It's a cash grab. You have to admit that. I mean, why else is Sony planning a Morbius movie, a Black Cat movie, and a Silver Sable movie all without Spider-Man? Even Craven with Spider-Man, probably not gonna work. But a lot of Sony's previous Spider-Men recently have not worked. As much as I love Mark Webb and his other films, it becomes more and more clear to me that he should have never directed a Spider-Man film. And the same kind of applies with Venom and its director. Ruben Fleischer brought such an energy to his breakout film Zombieland that I kind of expected him to bring that same approach to Venom, to bring some ingenuity, some creativity, and maybe even reinvent the genre. But sadly, he just falls back on the same tropes and things that didn't really work even 15 years ago. This is a long review. I got a lot more to say, but I think you get the point. Venom is a CBM born of the wrong era. If it was 2003, young 20-something Mike might have loved this movie, and like I said before, I can see why young people, listen how old I sound, might really enjoy this movie, but not for me. It was a mess. It was rushed. It was miscast. The villain is generic and terrible. The story is short and somewhat repetitive. And the fact is, the fight scenes, which should be the best part of any comic book movie, reminded me of a Michael Bay-style gelatinous blob battle, or as I call it, a burn it. And anybody who wants me to go off on that terrible post-credit scene, you let me know in the comment section, and I will don't get me started. My poll question is, do you think a Spider-Man cinematic universe can work without Spider-Man? As always, leave your answers in the comment section below. But until next time, school's out. Hey Real students, thanks for watching. If you want to subscribe to Real School, click that round Real School logo right beside me. Also click that damn notification bell so you're aware of all of Real School's new content. You can follow me on Twitter, and of course, if you get anything out of Real School, you can always give a little back. Just click the link in the description below or the button down there, and you can become part of my Patreon team.